Taylor, can you hear me?
I can't see you.
Can't see me.
Hearing you would be a neat trick.
Yep, connected. Okay.
Where are you? Where are you on it?
Lamed Chet. You have it?
Ah.
Working? You can hear me? Even? Wow. Gewaltig. Okay. So, Daf Lamed Chet. Let's start with it. Mika Hashem Elokeinu Unvi Lashavet Umashpili Lirot B'Shamayim V'Aretz. Obviously, this is a pasuk from Hallel, which we say all 8 days. And not only do we say all 8 days, we say a full Hallel all 8 days.
Even on Rosh Chodesh.
Even on Rosh Chodesh. Yeah, why do we say half a Hallel on Rosh Chodesh? Because it's only a minute. Because in the Gemara it doesn't say to say Hallel on Rosh
And on Shabbos you have 3 Sifrei Torah.
Chodesh. Shabbos it'll be Rosh Chodesh,
3 Sifrei Torah.
Tevis, with the Shabbos. So all 3 things with Channukah. So all 3 things together is 3 Sifrei Torah. In any case. So who is like Hashem Elokeinu? Who is like Hashem our God? Who brings me up, Hamakbihi, Lashavet. And there it's in the sense of Lashavet is like to sit calmly. And he also, apart from bringing me up, to sit there, Hamashpili Lirot B'Shamayim V'Aretz. And he also brings me lower, he takes me lower, in order to see the heavens and the earth. So this is a pasuk from Hallel. It's a little difficult to understand. What does David want when he says this? So let's see. So obviously this is all connected to Channukah in some way. You should know all the Maimarim most of the Maimarim that the Alter Rebbe wrote on Channukah, they have to do with the mitzvah, which is lighting the candles. And then the Tanya he develops this in a few chapters. The idea that a mitzvah is like a candle. Ki ner Hashem, ki Torah Or v'ner mitzvah. Torah is light, and a mitzvah is a candle. So to understand why a mitzvah is called a candle, it's one of the main topics of the Tanya. From chapter 35 and on in the Tanya, he teaches a passage, one of the most important passages in the Zohar, called the Channukah. And the Channukah was the son of Himnuna Saba. He was the son of one of the great sages in that time. He was a friend of Rashbi's. He also passed away very young. Even though he was called Saba, which was like the grandfather, I don't think he made it past 30. And his son is the Channukah, who appears in a few different places. He used to live in a place called Ki'in, which today is like a Druze village. It's very hard for Jews to live there, because as much as the Druze are nice, the moment a Jew comes to live amongst them, they make sure to kick him out.
It's not a Jewish.
It's a Jewish village that's occupied by Jews right now. Right? In any case, so there the Channukah teaches them, the 2 Chachamim that come to visit him after his father passed away, he teaches them about what it means that a mitzvah is like a candle. And from what he explains there, like light, and Torah is light. Mitzvah is a candle, and Torah is light. Hareshim Shila, obviously this is though a parable, it's an analogy. We have to understand why it's calling a mitzvah a candle and Torah light. So here we're going to dwell on the mitzvah being a candle, again because of the mitzvah of Channukah, which is to light candles. In a certain sense, say it straight out, Channukah is about strengthening our commitment to mitzvot. Really, that's the reason why we light candles. And people understand that it's
strengthen our connection to what?
To mitzvot. And it was the precursor to the revelation of the Torah Shabbat, the oral Torah, or the writing it down
In the written form.
in its written form. And there
Mark
needed
Esher.
to be,
Okay, sure.
after Channukah, 100 years later, we start having the sages who appear in the Mishnah. Actually, already in the time of Channukah, a few of them are already alive, mentioned in the Mishnah. In the time of the Zugot, the periods. Very close to it. And there was the internal strife between the rabbinical branch of Judaism and everything else began in the time of Channukah. One of the things that happened right away was that the masters of the oral tradition, they said, it's very nice that you got the Greeks out of Israel, but now hand over the leadership. Hand over the leadership to the descendants of the house of David. But they were Levites, they were priests, the Maccabim,
Kohan?
Hashmonaim, who were Kohanim, priests. And they said, no, we're keeping it. So there began to be this tension. And tension worsened and worsened until one of their descendants, he actually killed the entire Sanhedrin. It became that bad. And from there, there was an increased tension all the time between the leadership and the scholars. So in any case, in the end it was decided, by the Romans, sort of decided it for us by destroying everything. And then obviously the only thing that remained was the Torah.
Was that on Sukkot? When they pelted him with the Targum?
He was one of their descendants, and it was one of the reasons. It's very interesting that the oral scholars of Torah were always perceived, as very down to earth and connected to the people. And the priests, especially towards the final stages of the Second Temple, were perceived as being very elitist, very aloof, and actually a lot of people were very angry at the temple because they saw it as a symbol of the priesthood ruling the people.
Elitism.
Yeah, and they didn't like it. And in that sense, the rabbinical branch of Judaism had a tremendous success, and it's always had success. It was one of the arguments of Hasidus was that the success comes from connecting to the common people, to the common folk, and those are the people who Hashem wants. And if you're building a Judaism that's only elitist, it's not going to work. You can take the Torah and you can twist it any way you want. I don't know if it's even twisted. It's a legitimate interpretation, but if it leaves the common people behind, then something's wrong. And that was one of the arguments made by the Baal Shem Tov, that as great as these scholars might be, but they've left the people behind. And you can't do that. You have to be inclusive. You have to have everybody included in what you're doing. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction, and the whole idea was that you have to strengthen the belief in the mitzvos and the belief in the commandments, even if you don't understand them, because that's the essence of being able to build good oral Torah. And you have to accept what the Torah says completely, and then you have to build on that. In any case, let's see. Harei she'imshila katuv mitzvah l'ner. So the pasuk in Mishlei says, "Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or." It means that it's drawing an analogy. It's using a candle as a metaphor for a commandment. It also says, "Uchtiv ner havayah nishmat adam," that the candle of God is the soul of man, and this means sheneshamanim shala l'ner, that the soul is also likened by analogy to a candle. וצריך להבין מהו עניין הנר של מצווה ומהו הנר של הנשמה. So what is this idea of there being a candle, which is a candle that's a mitzvah, and a candle that's the candle of the soul? Is it the same candle? Are we talking about the same thing? Is the likeness the same? And so on. והנה עניין הנר הוא שקרוא אל שם הפתילה, כי היא עיקר הנר. What is a ner? So candle, we call a candle mostly for the wick, because it's the wick that shines. Ner is like from the shoresh, apparently from to light. So the light comes from the wick itself. The wick is what holds the flame. So the flame is something separate, lava, that's a different word. But what is it in the candle? That's the main point. The main part of the candle is the wick. That's called the ptila in Hebrew. But you can't really have a candle if you don't have some oil or some other burning substance, fuel. Why? שהשמן הוא הגורם להיות הדלקת הנר בנחת. It says without this fuel, without this oil, we're calling it oil in general. It could be any, it could be like wax that we use today, or some other, it could be propane, whatever you're using. So this oil is what allows the wick to burn for a long time. Meaning otherwise, so the wick would extinguish very quickly. And it would run through the wick in a matter of a few seconds. And the way that this works is that the wick draws the fuel into the flame. So the wick is acting, it's what's being burnt, it's what becomes charred, it becomes charcoal. And the fuel is being drawn, especially when you use an olive or a real oil candle. So you see that the oil is drawn into the wick and it descends even up, and then it's burnt when it comes in contact with the flame. והוא נשרף ונכלה באור הנאחז בפתילה עד שהוא קלה לגמרי ולא נשאר ממנו כלום, מפני שהוא עולה כולו באש. And from the oil there's nothing left, as opposed to the wick. Okay? Wick, you still get something left at the end, some piece of charcoal. Nonetheless, even though the oil is necessary, certainly the flame is necessary, what we call a candle, and that's what the Torah means when it says that the mitzvah is like a candle, the soul is like a candle, it's talking specifically and it's alluding to the main part of the candle, which is the wick. Because the flame is, there's two different words, ur and ol. Ol is light and ur is a flame. So the flame that's lit, it clings to the wick. If you try to connect the flame directly to the oil, it'll also go out immediately, because you need this intermediate between them, the wick, in order to consume the oil properly. So the wick is the intermediate here between the oil and between the flame. So now we have a general idea of the parts of a candle. Okay? So we have the oil, we have a wick, we have a flame. Those are three parts. So to understand how this analogy now explains or allows us to grasp something about a mitzvah, commandment, and about the soul of man. Again, these are two things that are very spiritual. So in order to understand them, we have to use some kind of parable. And the parable is a candle. It's like everything. The first mimer here, for instance, he starts talking about, first mimer for this week is about how the heat in the body is moved around, and he uses the medical terms that were available in his time. Today, a doctor would look at this and say, "Yeah, we don't understand it this way anymore. It used to be the time of Harvey, the Englishman who discovered circulation. That's how they thought about it. Now we think about this very differently. It doesn't matter because it's a parable." And from a parable, whether it's scientific, whether it's political, whatever it is, what you're supposed to extract is the essence, is the meaning, what's hiding behind it. So when the Torah says that the mitzvah is like a candle, the soul is like a candle, is giving you a parable, which it might be that you have different candles today, so you have to go back and think about what kind of candle they were using then, but essentially candles have stayed the same. And it's very interesting that they've stayed the same. You can still know electronic candles. It's very interesting. Nobody has ever, there's something special about this fuel, that's even when you make it hard, it's like wax, and the wick and the flame, that this parable has survived from the most ancient times. It's a tool that we still use. So, but in any case, whatever parable is brought in Chassidus or anywhere in Torah, You have to extract the essence in order to understand what they want to say. And it could be that our understanding has changed over time, but that doesn't matter at all if you want to extract the essence. So now he says, to understand this, that the Torah says, after Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol modecha. You should love Hashem with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. It says b'chol levavcha, it uses a strange word. It should have said b'chol libcha, with one bit. But it says levavcha with two bits. So say Chazal, why does it say two bits?
Two hearts.
Because it's two hearts. How do you have two hearts? You have two inclinations. Shnei yetzarecha, yetzer tov, u'v'yetzer ra, with the good inclination and the negative inclination. Shelichora no muvan, and really it's very hard to understand. Ech yashuv yetzer ala havayah havayah al yedei adam v'lo lo yishma elav. The purpose of the negative inclination is to always oppose the good inclination. So how can you say serve Hashem with both your inclinations? How can you come to such a state in which you're what people call an evil inclination, really it's just negative inclination, will suddenly listen to you and decide to serve God? And in any case, you would have to ask, so why do I have two of them? If the whole purpose in the end is that you're supposed to serve God, so one would have been enough. But there's a misunderstanding in conceptualizing what the sages were talking about when they said a good inclination and a negative inclination. Really, to understand this, you have to go like the Tanya, that there are really what we call not inclinations, but two souls, or two psyches. And they're always at odds with one another. And in Tanya, he calls them Nefesh Elokit, the Nefesh Abemit, the divine soul and the animal soul. And each one is composed of a full set of intellect and emotions. What does this mean? It means that you cannot explain the psychological state of any human being unless you assume that there are at least two people inside. It's a basic assumption, and it's one of the basic assumptions that's been carried through all of history. It doesn't mean the person's a split personality, because he's not exactly, doesn't exactly identify them as two different versions or two different people, but they are two different versions of himself. There are two different whole worlds that he has inside in terms of his psychology. So each one has a full set of sechel umidot. This is what he explains in chapter 3 in the Tanya. That both the animal soul and the divine soul has its own intellect and its own emotions. That it has its own intellect means that it has different rules of thought.
But the guy doesn't have a nefesh elokis.
But he has a nefesh sichlit. You always have two. Okay? Even if he doesn't have a nefesh elokit, so his intellect becomes his other soul. That's what there's an interpretation at the beginning of the Tanya. It says, "V'hanefesh hashenit psik beYisrael hi chelek elokam miman mamash." So this is the Rabbi passed this down, actually. This interpretation. Why did the author add the word in Israel? That the second soul in Israel is the divine soul. Because a non-Jew also has a second soul. It's just not the divine soul. What's his second soul? It's how the psyche works. The psyche, for him, is divided between his intellect, his intellectual soul, we'll call it, and his animal soul.
So it's a moral compass.
It's what people call a conscience. It's not exactly a conscience. It's much more than that. It's a whole soul. It's a whole nefesh. You understand that in nefesh, the divisions are infinite. You can divide as many times as you want. The simple fact is, when a person dreams, he can dream of as many people as he wants, and consciousness holds them all, and no problem. I had a dream last night with 3 of my friends. They weren't in my head. If you think they're in your head, you're crazy. But your consciousness has no problem splitting as many times as it wants. That's how consciousness is. In the same way that today we have a very good muscle for it, in the same way that any kind of computer or a smartphone or whatever has a lot of programs running at the same time. They're using the same. Everything is split between whatever you want. It's split as many times as you want. So
It's also like light.
And that's why the mashal that was brought, the parable that was always brought by the sages to explain something spiritual was that you can light many, many candles with one flame. That the flame doesn't diminish, or it's no less by adding another candle that is lit from it. So in any case, so in the Tanya, Paul says that you can't think about it as a force. The inclination is not an inclination that you have. Those words are misleading for a modern person. To say that it's just an inclination doesn't capture it. What you have to say is that you have a completely different psyche. You're two different people inside. You have a divine soul and you have an animal soul. How does it work? The main part of any soul in the end is its intellect, because that's what differentiates a human from a brute. That the animal, its main soul, is always its animal soul. That's why we call it an animal. That's why we call the animal soul an animal soul. Because the main thing that it does is it feels. What does it feel? It feels hunger, it feels pain, it feels this, it feels that. But it doesn't intellectualize. It doesn't think in the way that we think. And even when it's thinking, it's not thinking the same way that we're thinking. I mean, it has they definitely have an imagination. They can imagine that there's danger coming, but they don't think about it the way that we and that's why they also don't overthink it. That's why they act very quickly. By the divine soul, the intellect is used to contemplate God. It's used to contemplate the higher aspects of spirituality. It's used to contemplate the infinite light of God. And really, if you ask it, the divine soul, to come give you a good explanation of, I don't know, how to plant a garden, it's not going to do a very good job. It's not stupid, but those concepts are difficult for it. In the same way that somebody who's never experienced snow would have a hard time explaining to you for real what it means to, I don't know, ski. If you've never been, you might imagine it to be many, many things, but you have no understanding in it. You have to experience that thing that you're going to explain. If you haven't really experienced it, you can't really tell anything about it.
So you really need to tap into your animal soul for that.
So your animal soul knows how to ski. It knows how to plant a garden. It's the animal soul that has the experiences, that uses its contact with the physical world to contemplate and think about the physical world and the physical side of life. Okay? But it's not physical. The animal soul is not a physical being. It's a very spiritual being. It's a spiritual entity. But it's connected. The way it's wired to feel and experience the mundane aspect of life. And it's exactly the opposite from the divine soul. So now, how many people can say truly that they have a knack for things that are spiritual, that they understand it, that they have a language, that they've developed a system, that they can think about this for 3 hours a day and think about new things to do? So if your divine soul is not revealed, you can do very little of that. You can, just like me, you can repeat what somebody else who did have this came up with. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu, his whole life, he's completely disconnected from the world. There's no connection. There's no understanding of the physical reality. What is he good at? He's very, very good at contemplating God. He's very good at, he's what we call a religious person. But when you say a religious person, it can be somebody who's just religious and doesn't have the faculty. He doesn't have a divine soul. Therefore, the most that he's doing is he's surmising. He's contemplating, but he's only imagining. But he has no actual experience of the spiritual world. So he's talking about it from afar. So that's like somebody whose animal soul, whose intellect is interested in these things, but it doesn't experience them. So if you don't experience them, it's very hard to actually build an understanding of them. So what we have to do, since most of us don't have an experience of this, very few people in each generation that do, so we try to understand from their writings, from what they've experienced and shared with us. We try to understand more and more about this. But we have a divine soul, so our divine soul is fueled by learning these things. It becomes awakened, and the more a person learns, and again, this is a process that takes years, but eventually, after a year or 2 years of immersing in this, his senses, his spiritual senses, begin to awaken, and he begins to feel that, wait a minute, there's a spiritual world here, there's the light of the infinite here, and there's a way to go about connecting to it. So all this in the divine soul is called B'chinat Chochma Elyona, B'chinat Chakim Velo B'Chochma Elyona. This is what we mean when we say that there is wisdom that is not the regular wisdom. And this is a concept that comes from Rambam, who says you cannot know Hashem directly, you can't know God directly, you can only know Him indirectly, meaning that He's nothing like what you know. Okay, so He's nothing like what you know sounds like, well, you can't know it. No, what the Rambam means, and what's explained in Tikkunei Zohar, and what's explained in the Chassidus, what it means to say is that you cannot come to know God through the regular intellect that you have. It's not the regular wisdom. Hakim, he's wise, that's why in Tikkunei Zohar it says a little bit different than the Rambam. He's wise, but not in the known wisdom. When we say known wisdom, we mean mundane wisdom, the wisdom that has to do with understanding the physical experiences and concepts. Lemala min hasechel hamuskal musag v'gashmiut. So this wisdom, which comes from the divine soul, which is the faculty of the divine soul, it's the wisdom of the divine soul, is not like the wisdom of the mundane soul, of the animal soul, which is always connected to physical, mundane aspects. והשכל המושכל ומושג בגשמיות על פי שכל אנושי הוא שקר והפך ממש מחוכמת אלוקות, שהיא חוכמת אמת. And the problem with the mundane wisdom, with the wisdom of the animal soul, is that it is relatively always untrue compared to the wisdom of the divine soul. Why do we say that it's untrue? Because it's always changing. Meaning there is a problem with the animal soul and its intellect, that it can always say something, but it can always be overturned, completely changed. So that's why science is constantly changing, whereas Torah is constantly eternal. Not because, now one would say maybe that makes the mundane wisdom unimportant. It doesn't mean it's unimportant. It means that it works by a different rule. And the rule is that you're always just approximating. You're always just coming closer to what there is, but you can't fully know what there is. So you shouldn't feel a sense of failure because somebody overruled your theory. You had a beautiful theory. It was called Newtonian mechanics. So Newton didn't become an idiot when Einstein came along. He's still a smart man. But that was what was known then. The mistake that's done by so many people is that they compare the two wisdoms. They say the rules that work here also work there. It's simply not true. The science is made to change. And the sages, even just in the time of the Mishnah, they went through one of the biggest shifts in human understanding of nature, from what we call the Babylonian system to the Ptolemaic or the Greek system of the cosmos. The Babylonian system was that the earth is flat, and there's a dome over it, and the sun comes in every morning through a window in the dome. It goes over the expanse of the dome, then it comes out through a window at the end of the day. And then there was a question:
how does it get to the other side again?
Does it go under or does it go over? And the sages were very adamant that it goes over, and the Babylonians were very adamant that it goes under. And the sages even said, and there's proof that they're right and we're wrong. So why are we so adamant that it goes over? It's because it was a theological idea. It was a theological argument. It wasn't. Sages are not scientists. They're not going to come and find proofs for their theory, for their mundane theory. They say, I don't care, at this point, I don't care what the mundane theory is, which one is right. It could be that they're more right than we are. But in the end, why are we even discussing this in the Talmud? Why do we even care that the Babylonians had a theory about how the cosmos works? Because it's used as a parable in many things for things that we want to explain, things that come from the supernal wisdom, from the higher wisdom. And in the higher wisdom, there's a very important concept that there's no underworld. And the Babylonians, the reason that they had the sun going underneath was because of their duality. They had a dual system of gods, which is called, they had a god of the overworld, of the good god.
The good and the
they
evil.
had the evil god, who was the god of the underworld. And so their cosmos fit their picture. The sages had no problem with the fact that maybe they're right, the sun goes underneath. But I can't take this parable if what it's teaching you, the undercurrent of what it's teaching you is that there's a world underneath the earth. There's an underground world. So they completely discarded it. And they said, no, it really goes over. We don't know what happens. We're saying it's going over because we're more concerned about you feeling that there's an underworld than we are about the physical truth. Why? Because we know that the physical truth is going to change over time. Indeed, it didn't take more than 300, 400 years until the Ptolemaic system took over. What happened with the Ptolemaic system? Named after Ptolemy, but it was in existence from about the 4th century BCE. The Greeks had figured out that the earth is not flat, that it's a sphere, and that the sun doesn't go inside a dome or anything like that. It just goes around. That's how they conceived of the earth in the center. And all the planets just go around. And the sages were very happy with this. Why? Because first of all, we're done with this whole picture of there being an under-earth, because the earth is now a sphere. So there's no, you can't tell me there's something hiding underneath or whatever. It's like the woman with the turtles all the way down. Anyway, there's nothing underneath. It's all just one sphere. And it becomes very perfect and very nice and so on. And said, oh, we'll work with this. It's a very nice picture until Copernicus came along. And suddenly Copernicus says, no, you're wrong. The earth is not in the center. The earth is one of the planets circling the sun. What did the sages say? So there are sages who say, we can't say that it was wrong to say that the earth was in the center, because so much of the Torah is built with that parable. So we can't throw it out completely. We can't toss it out, because we used it for so many years. It served us well. And you're going to change anyway after, Copernicus, you think you're right. In 500 years, you're going to discover that you're not right, like we know today, that it's not exactly correct, that the sun is in the center, because it turns out that the sun itself is revolving around the center of the galaxy. So it's much more complex than what you thought. And all the time science changes. It's okay. That's how science is supposed to be. But we have to use the parable. So on the one hand, we don't discard completely the old parable. It still appears in the books. And the Rebbe was very insistent about not saying that it's incorrect. And he found all kinds of, even according to the present science, why it's not incorrect to say it. But obviously, if you're a scientist, you're not going to work with the Ptolemaic system. You're going to work with the Copernican system. And that's fine, because science changes all the time. But that's mundane wisdom. By the way, one of the greatest Rebbes, the Rishiner, was known as the Mashiach of his time. He was in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek. So when he was told that there was now a new system, the Copernican system, so he put down his head for a while, and he thought, and then he came up and he said, because this is how the tzaddikim wanted it. So what's it got to do with the tzaddikim? Science changes. It says because the explanation that was given afterwards was because in the Ptolemaic system, with the earth in the center, it's called the geocentric system, man becomes too egocentric. Geocentric and egocentric. Just play on the letters. You become too egocentric. You think that you're the center of the universe. And they said it's not good for man now to think that he's the center of the universe. There has to be a time of lowliness now. So even if sometimes they go too far and say you're just space dust, you're nothing at all. So you're not nothing at all. You're very important. But don't let it go to your head. So understand that what you do matters, but it's not because you're important. It's not because you're suddenly everything is because you're such a great you have such accomplishments. But divine wisdom, which is the wisdom of the divine soul, that is eternal. It doesn't change. It's only phrased and it's only enclosed in parables from experience. And obviously it's going to be enclosed in scientific parables because they're more they have more flesh to them. Yeah, right. They have more elements, more intricacy. Because that's how the mind's going to understand it. Because the mind, in the end, as we'll see in a moment, it belongs in the beginning to the animal soul. The divine soul doesn't come in until later. So the beginning of life is based, meaning when a person is growing up, the mindset, the intellect that they grow is a animal soul-based intellect, because it's mostly to help you get food. It's mostly to help you get what you want. And the whole problem with somebody growing up is that eventually, when you're 13, 14, when you become a teenager, you're supposed to switch, which is more important. Until now, your needs were to satisfy yourself. That's why the animal soul's intellect was more important. But at some point, you have to get beyond that and not look at how you satisfy your needs anymore. The divine soul is not interested in that. So if you're able to connect to the divine intellect, that's what Torah study gives you, the divine intellect, so you can begin to connect to the eternal side of life. The passing side of life is what I'm going to eat for lunch. I eat it and it's gone, and tomorrow I'll eat something else unless there's more leftovers from Shabbos, like children. Right?
Nobody eats children.
Oh yeah.
Oh my Lord.
So the passing side of life is how I'm going to get my next meal, is how what house I'm going to live in, and what clothes I'm going to wear, and all those things. And the eternal side of life that can only be attained through Torah. There's no other way to get to it. When you get to the eternal side of life, so suddenly these things they matter less. One of the things that takes a person out of the world is seeking his honor, his how do you say it? His esteem, how people treat him. So all these things are passing, because today they'll say good things about you, tomorrow they'll say bad things about you. It doesn't mean anything. But people are so hung up by it. Why are they so hung up by it? Because their intellect is managed by their animal soul. And if you can't build a divine soul, you can't get over these things. So everything, you'll never be able to fix your relationship with your parents, with your spouse, with your children. You can't. Because you're always you're managing it based on how the animal soul sees it. And the animal soul's economics are very poor. Put it that way. They're meant to last for the next 2 hours, not anything beyond that. The divine soul has an eternal view on things, so its economics are completely different. So the first thing that Baal Shem Tov told was whether they say good things about you or say bad things about you, it doesn't matter at all. Not because you're indifferent, but because in the divine wisdom, it simply has no weight. It's not what you're looking for. But to change your identification, stop identifying with the animal soul and move to the divine soul, that takes time. Okay. So that's the difference between them. So still, we haven't answered the question, what do we need an animal soul for? What's the animal soul good for? First of all, it's good for survival.
It's a vehicle.
Maybe for survival, it could just be an animal. Animals also survive. Why do you need an intellect for the animal soul? Okay. So that we'll begin to answer, I guess, tomorrow.
Did you have problems getting into the Chanyun today?